Okay. Hey, everybody. Welcome to today's presentation. We've got quite a few people with us here today, so really excited to get started. So just before we dive right in, let's just do a quick little bit of housekeeping. So just as a quick heads up, today's webinar will be recorded and available on demand after the live session. So if you have to hop off or if you want to share this with anyone else, you'll definitely be able to. Also, if you have any questions as we're presenting, please go ahead and submit them in the Q&A section of your portal. And if someone beats you to the question, you can always upvote the question so we know what's top of mind or what's a priority for you all. And if we have time at the end, we'll try to answer them right away. And then lastly, looks like a bunch of people are tuning in. So feel free to also use the attendee chat to just, say hi, let us know what you think. I see a lot of people already kind of getting in there, so that's exciting. All right. And so with that, let's start with a quick round of introductions. Welcome, everybody. My name is Ani, and I'm on the product marketing team here at GEM. I'll hand it off to Michael.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michael. I'm a senior customer success manager at GEM, and I'll hand it off to Rob.
Right on. Hey, what's up, guys? I am Rob. I lead the talent team at Earnest, normally based out of San Diego, currently in Detroit, home for a wedding. And what you can't tell is I have this hotel room cranked up to about 90 degrees to make sure that I can stay warm. But happy to be here. I will also apologize maybe for my face. It's officially Movember. Maybe if you can or can't see, it means I'm growing this hideous mustache. I'm doing my best job for wedding photos to slightly disguise it with a beard. But yes, I promise, I do normally shave my face. But happy to be here.
Love it. Well, looks like you're getting some support on the chat. That's awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. And also, now that we've introduced ourselves, let's hear from all of you. If you're comfortable, please go ahead and share your name and where you're tuning from in the attendee chat. We'd love to just get to know everyone. And also love the emoji reactions to AI sourcing. Looks like a lot of confused faces, so hopefully we can make those a little bit more smiley today. Cool. So just to give everyone a quick heads up, this is our agenda for today. So we're just going to talk about, at a high level, why is AI all the rage, how talent acquisition teams are using it, and then we'll dig deeper into AI sourcing specifically, what exactly it is, how it works, how you can think about evaluating solutions, and then especially more fun, like how can you actually use it? There's a bunch of solutions out there, but we have some good best practices. And then we'll leave some time off to just talk about some predictions and advice for any of you who are thinking about using AI. Cool. So real quick, why are we discussing this topic today? Why are Rob and Michael joining me? The stats here from pretty much lay it out. Gartner recently ran a survey with TA and HR leaders from organizations across multiple segments and industries, and basically all of them are saying that AI is a huge imperative for them. 3 in 4 HR leaders are saying they're already looking into AI to be competitive. And so when Gartner dug in to the specifics there, they found that there's 3 really popular use cases across TA and HR, but probably sounds right about to all of you, but improving efficiency, elevating the experience for employees and end users, and at the same time looking to reduce costs. So naturally, AI is top of mind for everyone, but I'm now going to hand it off to our panel, starting off with Rob. Does this kind of summarize what you're hearing in the market and, what's got you excited about AI?
Absolutely not. I disagree with Gartner. No, I think these are the big points. Maybe a couple things to call out is I think there's been enough innovation and new tools just added in the last few years where you can apply AI to any single point of the candidate or even just employee experience. But what's important is I don't think that you should just add AI in a particular area just because it's what everyone else is doing. Oh, hey, 63% efficiency. Okay, cool. That's where we should be using it. You should use it for what's most important for you and your team. For me, what's most important is how can we create more time for where people need to have the most impact. So yes, a lot of that is going to fall under efficiency type things, but I think that's just one important thing to call out.
Yeah, totally. And Michael, as our customer success manager, what are you hearing from our customers in terms of what's got them excited about AI?
Yeah, to Rob's point, I think these categories are pretty broad, but I think the 63% around efficiency, that resonates with me just because the main use case I've seen is there's a lot of different options for using AI as a recruiter, but it's about like doing some discovery and finding that like magical use case at like 10x is your efficiency around a certain task, whether that's, writing job descriptions or, rediscovering candidates. So it's not immediately like obvious what are those 10x efficiency boosts, but to Rob's point, really understanding your process and being able to like dig in and do some iteration to find the areas where you can just save yourself a ton of time and then be able to like do that on a repeat basis moving forward. So I think that's what I found with our customers is it's not the same for everybody, but it's really about finding those handful of things where you can save yourself a ton of time.
Yeah, definitely. Good point. So, taking that like one step deeper, especially with like from HR, but specifically within talent acquisition, that same Gartner survey looked at like what are TA leaders specifically prioritizing, a lot to what you and Rob and Michael have just mentioned. But the three areas are candidate matching and ranking, candidate personalization, and sourcing, which is why we're talking about it today. And just at a bird's eye view, like how's Gartner defining these things? So candidate matching, this is probably not new to most of you since we've heard about it for so many years, but just finding the right candidates is always one of the hardest parts of recruiting. So if you can use AI to help you, find the ideal candidate fit to your job requirements. And then when it comes to candidate personalization, it was a bit vague, but I just dug into the report a little bit. And so it essentially means personalizing the experience across the entire process. So like Gartner talks about recruitment marketing, where you can automatically, adjust your career site for the visitor, the job postings that are on there, the communication, the content, the job recommendations. It could also be like having a virtual assistant or a chat bot that helps job seekers by answering standard questions through that chat interface. And it could even be things like scheduling, where, if you're scheduling a candidate for an interview on site, you can send that personalized pre-interview preparation kit and then post-interview tips and tricks specifically to that candidate or to that role. And then, of course, the third one just being automated candidate sourcing. It's one of the most painstaking parts of recruiting, but it's also necessary. And so many HR leaders are really excited at the prospect of using AI to do the search for you and then bring you back a slew of candidates that are an immediate good fit. But, Rob and Michael, we'll start with Rob first. Like, what are you hearing from your peers on the market? And does this kind of resonate in terms of why you're excited about AI and TA specifically?
Yeah, I think it definitely resonates. I'll say of like maybe two particular points and then one that's not called out on here. But I'd say for sure, top of funnel. Like I mentioned in the previous slide of like use it where your team members maybe won't add the most value or maybe even just like hate spending their time. Like let's just name it and call the thing. Most people don't like to review resumes or source unless maybe we'll say it's like new music released Friday on Spotify and you got a great album that came out, or if it was last Monday, Tyler the Creator, great album to check out. But there's a lot of wasted time in those areas. You have an application pass-through rate of maybe between like 2 and 4%. How do you just move that away? On the personalization and branding, maybe how I look at this is like, what information is most important to get in front of candidates at what stage, and how do you proactively get that in front of them? So if you're sourcing a candidate, the candidate's going to want to know about, hey, what is this company, who works there, and what's this role all about? Then maybe after initial screen, what are candidates going to want to know more about? Okay, who is my boss going to be? Who are my team members? And maybe a little bit on growth. Once you get to the end of the funnel, like more at panel stage, then it becomes more on pitching, more on the business upside of the company, also more specific, maybe project impact. So again, what questions you need to answer, but how do you get that in front of the conversation? So then when you're actually speaking with the candidate, it's less about convincing them of this idea and more of spending time talking about specific questions and selling them on the idea. And then maybe the final piece that I'll mention of like that's not called out on here, but something that's really important to me is around reporting. Our tools already have all of the data that they need to make, maybe I'll say like diagnostic insights. I don't really know if that's a word, but we'll use it. But to give an example of a lot of times what happens is you'll get a number of like, you've hired 50 people this quarter. That is 10% less or more than previous quarter. What I would love to see is suggestions on maybe why that is the case. So another example could be like your offer acceptance rate is down. Here's what might have happened. And I don't expect that answer or insight to be perfect, but at least can help get you started with maybe 2 or 3 suggestions. It could be that you are maybe this quarter you were hiring positions at a higher level, or maybe the candidates that you were recruiting from were from some specific company that have more competitive, I don't know, offer packages. So I think there's a huge opportunity, and something that I haven't seen that I want to see is within reporting.
Yeah, that's a really good point. As someone who has to like go through data myself, I would love it if an assistant could like do a little bit of the legwork for me just to help me get started. Um, Michael, how about you? Like, where are like where are Gem customers really excited about for using AI in recruiting?
Yeah, I will plus one that idea from Rob. That sounds fantastic. I think our customers would love AI generated insights on their dashboards. But when I look across these 3 categories, I think specifically like the candidate matching ranking and the automated sourcing is really going to be company dependent. Like, what are your needs? Like, are you getting a ton of inbound? Well, then, yeah, candidate ranking is going to be pretty important. Do you have really strong inbound funnel? Maybe like automated sourcing is going to be less important. So I think there are like some company specific factors that are going to play into like those 2 aspects. But the part that I'm really excited about, and that I think a lot of our customers at Gem are really excited about, is the personalization piece. And again, to Ani's point earlier, personalization is super broad, but just like as an example of a way that you can personalize the recruiting experience at scale, I'll use Rob's top of funnel example. Well, when you're sourcing at top of funnel, there's net new candidates you're reaching out to for the first time, but maybe you also want to source from previous candidates that are in your ATS, or you want to source people that have been prospected a few years ago, and maybe they weren't open to remote work at or you didn't have remote work at the time, and now your company is open to remote work, or maybe timing was bad. In the past, it was really tedious to go back and segment customers to do this personalized outreach at top of funnel. With AI tools, instead of relying on like super complex Boolean and like search strings, just being able to use natural language query to like surface cohorts of candidates into like these groups and then personalize your outreach based on your past relationships. I think like those types of use cases feel really magical because it allows you to personalize, but you can do it in a way that's like much more efficient than it was in the past.
Yeah, definitely. So just kind of moving along, I think we've already talked about it, so just kind of quickly breeze through it. But because we're specifically involved with recruiting at Gem, these are some of the most popular use cases that we are looking into for helping our customers. So as Michael and Rob have both mentioned, like using AI to source so that you can help recruiters immediately find those good qualified candidates that they should reach out to. With inbound applications, just helping them prioritize the list, right? We know that so many applicants aren't always a good fit for a role, or they don't even meet the minimum requirements. And then the last part, just the talent rediscovery, right? A lot of our large enterprise customers, they have this huge database in their CRM and ATS, and just trying to search for candidates within that is so cumbersome, but there's so much gold there. So having AI do that search for you could just make that whole process so much faster. But let's dig into AI sourcing specifically, since that's the key of the webinar today. We asked a number of our customers specifically, why were they so keen on AI sourcing? And we generally got responses that fit into one of these 3 themes. The first one just being that like headcounts have noticeably shrunk over the past couple of years for recruiting teams. And what we've heard is that they're still being asked to do quite a bit of work, even though they have less resources on hand. The other thing is just that the cost of talent is becoming more expensive, and these teams are on a much tighter budget. So they're all looking at how can they reduce their spend on job boards, on agencies, or any other sources. And then lastly, and we'll talk a lot more about this, like generative AI, like what exactly it is. But with the onset of ChatGPT, as I'm sure all of us are familiar with, or even Claude, AI technology has just gotten really, really good, right? And it's really impressive what you can get when you just throw in a few prompts, and we'll get to talk about those prompts in a few minutes. But it's just getting really good results, and so there's just less hype and more like actual results that are coming from AI. But yeah, let's hand it off to our panel real quick. Rob, like any other color you want to add into like why TA teams are so excited about AI specifically for sourcing?
Yeah, I mean, maybe just echo one particular point. I think in the first two of, I don't think it's just, hey, we're being asked to do more with less. I think it's more like we actually can do more with less. And that's very, very important, especially for any like TA leaders of think about how to continually like evolve your team. Like the traditional like sourcer, recruiter coordinator, and recruiter model, I don't think like that's going to continue for all the reasons that you just mentioned. Like we know there's a lot of automation in messaging. We know there's a lot of automation in scheduling. So think about how you can evolve your team and how these tools can help. And if you do have less resources and maybe you don't know where to start, I always like to throw out there, I'm like, just think about like what grinds your gears. Like when you're sitting there working, it's just like, oh my gosh, like I do not want to do this. Or like I am wasting so much time in this area. And that's probably going to give you a pretty good signal on where you can apply this, whether it is sourcing or somewhere else.
That's a really good point. Grind your gears. That's good. And I think you got a fan who said that was the most accurate statement. So right on, Rob. Michael, how about you? How does this resonate with you?
Yeah, I would just say on the AI sourcing front, I like to think of it around like pipelining. I think that's really where there's this huge efficiency gain because traditionally, like when you're building pipeline for a certain role, you're kind of constrained by keyword searching and booleans and filters. Just the ability to use natural language. For some roles, those boolean strings and keywords might be helpful if it's something more technical with like very specific coding language requirements. But when you think about some of these more like nuanced sales roles or HR roles, like keywords and booleans are less helpful. So I think the ability to use natural language and be able to target people from specific industries or account executives that have experience selling to marketers, like those are types of things that are like traditionally like pretty hard to query using Boolean strings and keywords, but like with AI it makes it much more efficient to like build quality pipelines of relevant talent.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I can't tell you how much I hate Booleans. And you got a fan there too, Michael. So now that we've talked about the value of AI sourcing, hopefully we've convinced you why like AI could be a really helpful feature in your sourcing efforts. I wanted to move gears to talking a little bit about how you can evaluate the different tools. And the reason I wanted to talk about this is because now that AI is like commercially available through like ChatGPT and Claude, I'm sure many of you on the panel have seen this. There's so many AI sourcing products that have come to the market. And it's really, really overwhelming, right? And some of these are completely brand new solutions that have just come out to the market recently. And then there's others where you have existing TA vendors, like whether it's us at Gem or other providers, they've started adding AI into their actual platform. And so the question comes like, do you add a new solution or do you try to get your vendor to add more AI into their platform? And which way would you go? So there are pros and cons to both approach, and we've tried to outline some of the ideas here. But at Gem here, we specifically believe that having AI embedded into your existing CRM or ATS will be better for you because if you have AI that's actually part of that platform, it's going to be operating on a more complete data set. And obviously there's more cost savings that come with just using fewer tools. And then for your recruiters, again, just having less tools means you're juggling between different systems. We know a lot of our customers talk about how there's just like way too many tools for every little thing. So those are some of the core benefits that we see with asking your vendor or pushing your vendor to use AI in their platform versus adding more stuff. But that being said, Rob, tell me more, like, how does this resonate with you? Do you kind of agree with these sentiments, or do you have other pros and cons that teams should consider?
Yeah, I think this is a good overview. I will say a lot of new tools have come out. And by the way, I totally support and I love the competition because I think it's just going to fuel more innovation. And in a perfect world, we would all use one tool from, you can say, the beginning of the funnel to the end of the funnel. Now, that's rarely possible, I'd say, for like several reasons. There's one, you might just have like legacy tools and systems in place. There's also something like, don't forget about, if something as basic as contract renewal dates. If you have multiple tools, it's very rare they all align on the same date. So you kind of do this trade-off of like, do we keep this for another year? Can we do this for another 6 months? Do we bring something else in? And then you have competing priorities. of you have your individual role priorities, you have your broader, maybe we'll say people team or HR priorities, and then also company. And you need to match your own tools and systems to support those. So I guess my suggestion or something that I think about is just think about what you're willing to trade off, because consolidation isn't always the answer. There is cost along with that as well. So if you do have like a smaller team, maybe a smaller volume, and it's only maybe your TA team that is using the tool, you can probably trade off having more tools or maybe trade off consolidation for better performance, meaning having additional tools. Vice versa, if you have a larger team, a larger volume, and a lot of hands in the pot, or what is it, cookie jar, whatever that analogy metaphor is, you should probably trade off like performance for having a more unified system. And that doesn't mean keeping something that's bad. It just means you do need to weigh those things out. And there are pros and cons to just moving to consolidation. I don't think that's always the answer.
Yeah, that's a fair point too. Michael, from like the GEM customer perspective, like what are you hearing in terms of like how other enterprises or organizations are thinking about adding AI to their tech stack?
Yeah, I think Rob made a really good point in terms of evaluating like consolidation versus point solutions. I think with point solutions, the key is like really understanding the scope of the solution. And I find, just from talking to customers, the more narrowly scoped an AI point solution is, the better it performs. When it tries to have a broader scope of capabilities, the risk that you run is like not having full context. And I've heard from countless customers running into this challenge specifically with AI sourcing, where they will have an AI sourcing tool that's going out and helping to build pipeline, but it doesn't have the full context of all of the relationships within the ATS or even within the CRM. So they're surfacing candidates that already have a previous relationship with the company, and then they're reaching out, or worse yet, sending automated AI generated messages to these new candidates that are actually have existing relationships. So it ends up having like a really poor prospect or candidate experience there. So I think you just have to be really aware of like, what is the scope of this solution and what context does it need to be super effective? Because there are definitely like downside risk if you're trying to implement point solutions that don't have the full picture.
Yeah, that's a good point. Now that I think about it, I do sometimes get messages from some recruiters that like I feel like was not meant for me, and I wonder now if that was like just poorly calibrated AI. Cool. So this one's going to be a little bit more technical, a little bit more fun. I promise I'll try not to lose you all here, but generally speaking, like if you're also asking about what kind of AI tool you want to use, there's two types of AI models that exist out there in the world, like especially the ones that we hear in the market. So there's machine learning, or ML, and then there's large language models. So again, trying to like keep this a more high level, but machine learning, it's the type of AI that you've heard for a very long time. It's existed before ChatGPT. If I had to describe it in my own words, it's basically like it's a set of algorithms that are trained on past behavioral data. So, when you shop on Amazon, they probably have an ML model that's looking at your shopping history, and then they're going to use that data to recommend you more products to buy, right? And that usually works pretty well for them. And basically, the more data you give them, the better they can make predictions on new data. So this can be pretty powerful. It can be customized. But the one downside with machine learning typically is that it has to be limited and trained on a very specific use case. So it's not going to be used for a broad set. Large language models, on the other hand, they operate a little bit more differently. They work on a much, much larger data set, right? Like pretty much the entire internet, like ChatGPT or Claude does, right? And LLMs are supposed to be more general purpose, and they're also more conversational. So it's more two-way. So you can interact with an LLM, you can give it specific prompts or questions or instructions, and then the LLM will spit out a response, like answering that question, writing a draft, or even making an image, right? So, naturally, when you're evaluating these tools, like which model is better for recruiting, and, not to give you the cheesy answer, but the answer really is that it depends. But for what it's worth, our internal engineering team was grappling with this ourselves at GEM. So we ran a bake-off between these two types of models. We, used it to see which model could better find a good candidate match for the job requirements we gave. And what we found is that a general purpose large language model was giving much better results with less calibration, and it was also making better adjustments once we gave it additional prompts. And so in general, our philosophy is usually that LLMs are a better underlying model for AI tech when it comes to recruiting. And so when you're talking to a potential vendor about AI capabilities, whichever one you choose, I would definitely push them on asking like, hey, what AI tech are you using and how are they designing it to give you accurate results? But Rob, I'm sure you've had conversations with multiple vendors about this kind of stuff. Like, how does this resonate with you? Do you have any other kind of like pros and cons or questions that you would consider asking?
Yeah, I agree with your points. I think this is a good overview. I'll also just be honest of like I'm not technical. I can sit here and act like I know exactly what these things mean, but like if you were to actually sit me down with a smart person, like I wouldn't know maybe if they were lying to me or if they were telling the truth. So I think it's really important for us in the TA space of being honest about that and also asking all your vendors, CSMs, whoever they are, of like about their model and what that actually means. Every single person is going to pitch, whether it's like ML, LLM, AI. Okay, cool. But I want to know what that actually means for your product and whether you feel qualified to vet that or speak to it, or whether you need to bring someone else in. Like I'm sure if you were to do this, some other team is going to be involved in the integration, whether it's like engineering or IT. Feel free to bring those people in, because a vendor should be able to talk through all of those points. And I think we have a responsibility that we should also be testing it to make sure that the solution is right. Because maybe I'm the only person in the TA space that doesn't have the technical ability to understand all of this, but I think it's good to have that awareness and be honest.
Totally, that's fair. Michael, how about you? Do you have a strong point of view between these two?
No, I'm in the same camp as Rob, not technical enough to understand the nuance here. But the one thing I will say is just an observation is that with all like the pace of innovation when it comes to LLMs and all the funding that's going towards companies like ChatGPT and Anthropic, I think a lot of people here are familiar with their latest raising rounds. Like I've firsthand witnessed the impact of all of that investment in terms of just the capabilities of the underlying model. But then the other piece is the cost of the underlying model. So as these things get more capable and more efficient from like a cost perspective, a lot of those cost savings and a lot of those enhanced capabilities are going to be passed down to the tech that's using the underlying LLM models.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. Yeah, I'm not super technical myself, so I had to actually run by my talking points with an engineer to make sure that I wasn't saying anything that makes me sound too stupid. So I tried my best. So let's talk about we've talked about the different AI tools, how to evaluate them. One thing that we found is that generally speaking, regardless of what tool you use, there's actually some really good best practices that work for any of those AI tools that you use. And so before we go into those specific best practices, just if I could give you like one thing to take away, if you're thinking about using an AI sourcing solution or you're already using one, like how do you give it the right prompts? The simple framework that we say is think of your AI sourcing bot as a junior recruiter, right? If you have a junior recruiter on your team, like how would you help them get started? You probably want to give them very explicit instructions, but you don't want to be too literal. You want to give them an example of, what a good candidate profile looks like and why that is good. And so basically what we've seen is that if you can give AI those clear instructions, an example of a good profile and why, the AI can then work within those guardrails that you give and just get you a very good starting point when it comes to, servicing candidates. But, Rob, I know you've had some experience. How does this framework work for you? Are there any kind of other kind of thoughts that you would say before we go into the deeper best practices?
I don't have too much to add here. I agree with everything that you mentioned. I think it's a good call out. Something that resonated with me, this is earlier on in my career, someone from marketing once told me of like, hey, your presentations should be built so a sixth grader can understand. And I think that's also relevant to us in this space as we think about writing these different prompts. But I don't have too much to add here. Agree with everything that you mentioned.
Michael, how about you? I know you've been training our customers on Gem AI.
Yeah, definitely. I see all these requests for demos in the chat, and maybe Ani can set something else up. I would love demo Gem AI. It's my favorite product to demo. But in terms of like the question here, I think the other thing that you have to take into account is like what is the data set that you're asking AI to assess. So if we're talking about inbound ranking, you have the full resume at your disposal. So there's a lot more nuance you can get when you're building those natural language prompts and those qualifications. Whereas when you're doing AI sourcing, you're limited by publicly available data. So I think you need to be really explicit when you're building qualifications that you want the AI to assess and let it know exactly how you should be assessing that by looking at the profile. So like the more literal and detailed you can be, the more accurate your results are going to be.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. So let's go into the meat and potatoes, some best practices. So just as a full disclaimer, these are some of the best practices that our team has built with our customers as they were starting to use AI sourcing in GEM. And we codified this a little bit so that all of our customers and even folks here who are not necessarily using GEM just have something to get started with. So, you see the details in this table, and these slides will be available in the recording as well. But if I just had to be very, if I had to just kind of summarize it, like it's about being specific, it's about being concise, trying not to be too vague or subjective. So being as objective or measurable as possible. And then just another fun pro tip, which is, kind of interesting, is like if you have like multiple qualifications that you're looking for, but they're similar, don't list them out one by one. Just put them all in one phrase. I know it sometimes doesn't sound intuitive, but the AI is actually better if you just put it all together in one. So, this table here just shows you examples of each of these, like shows you like quote unquote a bad example and then a good example that we've seen returns better results. So yeah, hopefully this resonates with you. If you're in the attendee chat, and you feel comfortable, share some fun AI prompts that you've used that that use good results. But in the meantime, like Rob, I'm just going to ask you, like, how does this resonate with you as you've been kind of playing around with AI sourcing?
Yeah, I think this makes sense. I think this is some good pointers. Also to a lot of this stuff of like where it becomes most beneficial or where it starts to resonate too is just like a recruiter or a sourcer is actually when you start to put it in practice. So just a quick reminder, as probably everyone would do, is when you're building these things out, treat it as you would do any other search of like maybe come up with a defining metric of like what success would look like to you, whether it's like the number of results that come back, and just continue to iterate. Because you can have almost like your inputs or your idea of what you want to do of a good and bad example, but sometimes you won't actually learn until you see it in real time.
Yeah, that makes sense. Michael, I know you're particularly really good at this. Any kind of pro tips you have for our panel here?
Yeah, I would just say like one thing that I've learned in iterating on this with our customers, and I think that's a key point too. You want to keep iterating and try different things to see what lands. But I think giving the AI suggestions on how they can evaluate for certain skills or experiences. So even something as simple as like account executives with experience selling to marketers. In a test that I did, that performed less well than the same phrase, account executives with experience selling to marketers, comma, based on their previous job titles and companies and products that the companies that they worked at. So it's like that little qualifier where you're like giving it something else that it can use, where it's like, oh, they work for ABC company that sells to marketers, instead of they explicitly wrote that they sell to marketers on their profile, can help you actually generate like higher signal. So there's these like fun little nuances where you're actually coaching the AI, like this is what I want. And this is how I want you to evaluate if somebody meets that criteria. That can be like super helpful.
Yeah, good question. And I see some people in the chat actually sharing some of their examples in the panel. So that's kind of fun. Thanks to y'all for sharing some of your favorite prompts. So moving on, just like real quick, like if I had to put these best practices in actual implementation, like this is an example of a search that we share with our customers. So, again, this is just a high level search that uses the best practices that we just talked about. And obviously you want to further customize it. But as you can see, this is what we mean when you say like be specific, how to make the qualifications concise, how to avoid ambiguity. So yeah, this is a good starting place for many people who are starting to use GEM. But moving along, I actually want to talk about the next part, which I think most of us probably have used outside of GEM. So the other half of sourcing is actually reaching out to the candidates. So let's assume you set up your prompts, you got some good candidates. Now you need to like reach out to them and convince them like, hey, you should come apply or take a call with us, right? And I'm sure, honestly, like I'm going to put this in the panel, like give me a hand emoji if you've used ChatGPT to write an email, right? I'm going to say like most of you have, right? And again, if you have an AI sourcing tool, you're probably using it to also write the email or at least a draft. And so we also wanted to share some best practices on like how can you get AI to write you a really good email. So here's some of the key best practices, but just summarizing it, like AI could work really well if you tell it to say, hey, look at the candidate's profile, like Michael was saying, right? And pull nuggets out of that. Whatever kind of email it writes, ask it to do it in a more corporate or in a more conversational tone. So like, just using more everyday language so that it doesn't always sound corporate or boring. This one for me is actually true. Whenever I ask ChatGPT to like write me a draft, it always sounds like super markety. And then I have to like remind it like, hey, can you make it sound like a real person? And then the most of all, like, always make sure that the AI knows to like talk about the future growth opportunities for these roles, right? Because that's what candidates care about most. And I'll just say like, these are just good best practices to include in your email, whether or not you use AI. But we've just seen that if you tell the AI to specifically do these things, the outreach they draft, our customers are seeing a 40 to 50% increase in response rates when they're using AI like this to write their outreach. But yeah, Rob, turn it over to you real quick. Like any other good pro tips or how does this resonate with you?
It resonates, I'd say maybe one step further. So it looks like from the chat, and I imagine everyone is using some sort of AI or some sort of tool to help with messaging, right? Could be, I don't know, we're using with GEM, LinkedIn, Grammarly for like grammar, ChatGPT. To your point that you mentioned of like, I find people are spending less time creating the message and spending more time making it sound like it's coming from you, right? Your own voice. So you could even be given a prompt like you mentioned of like, oh, make this more informal or make this sound like a real person or make this more concise. What you can do if you haven't done it before, if you can even just create your own GPT bot, you can even just like upload all your previous messaging and then give it the format that it should always be written in, meaning like, hey, you should have a quick opener. Then it should be like 2 supporting examples of like why this role is great. And then 2 supporting examples of what stood out in their profile and some type of close. It will literally only take like 10 minutes to set up. And then all you have to do after that is go back to that same bot and say, cool, write me an outreach message for this role. And it'll be in your voice in the exact format that you want. And it'll take much less editing than just trying to start with, make this sound better, make this sound more informal. So maybe that's one extra tip that I would add.
Yeah, fair. And then Michael, you've been the pro. I think you drafted half of these best practices for us. What do you have to say?
Well, Rob really stole my thunder there. That was my pro tip.
That was my intention. I just wanted to steal all the good talking points.
It is very much worth $20 a month, whether it's ChatGPT, like the premium version, or Claude. I find the Claude projects especially helpful for what Rob described. And I do this as a CSM. It's going to work very similar as a recruiter, but like you can save so many hours just like writing the first draft of your email and getting it like super close by creating one of these things called a project, which is like a saved prompt. But I think the thing that really sets it over the top is when you have a reference doc of like, these are great emails that I wrote in the past, and this is my voice in your custom instructions, not only giving it the format that you want to write emails in, but also telling it to reference the reference doc of great examples. And then when you need to generate an email, you can give it some high level context and it's going to write a first draft that's like 95% of the way there, which is just like such an immense time saver when you have to generate like a ton of these emails at scale. It just really speeds up the process. So yeah, and some companies will.
And I was going to say, sometimes it's kind of scary. I said it speeds up the process and sometimes it's scary. Sometimes it's so accurate. I'm like, this sounds like me.
Totally.
Yeah, kind of like a world where they're gonna
better than the email that I would have wrote without it. That's the most scary.
Yeah. we're just a few years away from like a Westworld scenario if you watch that show where like you meet an AI that like replicates who you are as a person, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, cool. Well, I know we're nearing the end, so I'm going to make this more of a lightning round. Just quick thoughts. So, future of AI sourcing. We know what exists today. We've talked about it. Rob, what are a couple of things that you think are going to be big in AI sourcing in the next few months and years?
Yeah, so I have three things in particular that maybe I'm looking out for. There's one, automating the entire top of funnel with no human input. So you already have products doing this of like your qualifying, your outreach, and your scheduling. In the perfect scenario for me of a recruiter doesn't even see a candidate, or their first point of contact is just a calendar invite, right? The tool itself is already doing the qualifying, messaging, finding time, and all you see again is like, hey, you're going to be meeting with Rob on Thursday at 2 p.m. to speak with them about this role. So that's one. I'd say the second point too, and some tools have this, is some form of stack ranking when you're looking at like required or desired skills and responsibilities. We know as like recruiters of this particular skill is more important than this. Or if you find someone at this company and they only have 2 years of experience instead of like 4 years, that's actually just as good. Like, how can you build that into the model? And then the third piece is somehow finding a way to include, I'll say, like candidate achievements in the sourcing model. An example of like, hey, we see this candidate got promoted 3 times at the most recent company. That's how tells us that like, wow, this person's probably some sort of driver. They love challenges. They're probably a great team. There's all of these like soft skills or things that we know when we look at a profile that would love to be included in these different AI sourcing models. So those are probably my top 3.
Yeah. Michael, any quick lightning rounds for you?
Yeah, once again, Rob stole some great talking. But I would just say, just to like build on Rob's, I think like the real opportunity here is like breaking free of the traditional like criteria that we think about for finding candidate fit, you know, X amount of years of experience doing XYZ job, and actually getting insights into more of the soft skills and maybe some of the unconventional candidates that might be like a really stellar fit for a role that traditionally would get screened out because of these parameters that we're putting on our current searches. So I think there's like a really exciting time ahead where this like really diversifies the personas that you would consider for specific types of roles, and leveraging like some of that data in HR where it's like which non-traditional candidates have really kind of excelled and what types of backgrounds and soft skills are like a great fit for this role. I think AI makes like iterating on those types of insights like much more efficient.
Yeah, that's going to be fun. Cool. I know we have a little less than 2 minutes, and I know people wanted to hear about Gem AI, so I'm just going to do a quick 30-second blurb, and then we're going to bring back our last question. Just wanted to let everyone know, like some of you all have asked, like, hey, does Gem have AI? Like, what kind of products we have? So just wanted to let everyone know. We have an entire AI suite dedicated to helping recruiters. So, as we've talked about it, like it's embedded into our platform. And so customers who are using Gem, they're using it to source passive talent. They can rediscover candidates in their CRM or ATS. And we also have an AI inbound ranking solution. So if you have a large volume of inbound applicants, you can use the AI to like prioritize that list. And we've already got a number of customers who've been using this AI, including like Asana, Descript, and Intercom. So if you do want to learn more about our AI products, again, click the request personalized demo. The few of you that asked for that demo, I'll follow up with you all. I also sent a link to our demo day webinar. But yeah, just wanted to let you all know that exists. But with like the less than 30 seconds we have, Rob, you're in the space, you're a TA leader. What advice do you have as a parting wisdom before we wrap up?
Yes, 30 seconds. All right, I can talk pretty fast. Maybe one, an echo of, again, to just use AI to free up time for where your team members are going to have the most impact. Where that is mostly is just like candidate experience, assessment, and closing. And then as a leader, I think what is very, very important for both your stakeholders and your team is to be very clear about how you're going to define the success of the tool. Everyone's going to have their own idea of like, is this tool performing or not? Or like, should we be using this? Adoption is very, very important, but also be clear on like what's good and what's bad.
Awesome. Nailed it. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you to our panel, Michael and Rob, and thank you, everyone, for attending. Appreciate you all, and have a wonderful rest of your day.